Welcome back, everyone. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083H and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, November 21st, 2024, the committee is resuming its study of the windup of TikTok Technology Canada, Inc. I'd like to welcome our witnesses for the second hour today. From the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, Daniel Rogers is here as the Director, and Paul Lind, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Intelligence Collection. I'm going to go to you, Mr. Rogers. You have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. Go ahead, sir.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Monsieur le Président. Mesdames et Messieurs et les membres du comité, bonjour.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, hello. I have a brief statement. My name is Dan Rogers. I am the Director of CSIS, and I'm joined by my colleague Paul Lind, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for intelligence collection. It is an honor to join you today and to have the opportunity to contribute to your important discussion on the winding up of TikTok Canada. I hope to provide insights to this committee on CSIS's role in ensuring the protection of Canada's national security interests, the safety of Canadians, and Canada's prosperity. The Investment Canada Act, which is administered by Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, ISED, ensures that significant investments in Canada by non-Canadians benefit Canada's economy. To this end, the Act allows the government to review foreign investments to ensure that they are not harmful to Canada's national security. The Act aims to strike a balance between promoting economic prosperity and safeguarding Canada from foreign actors seeking to gain ownership or control of sensitive Canadian goods, technology, infrastructure, or personal data for purposes that could be injurious to Canada's national security.
With its mandate, CSIS regularly screens ICA notifications for security concerns, and we work with ISED, Public Safety Canada, and other federal granting councils to inform the GC's decisions. This work is essential as Canada is a target for a number of adversarial state actors looking to advance their own national interests at our expense through their investment activities. Social media platforms in particular are of interest to threat actors because of the data that they generate and collect. They run surveys, collate data sets, and request access to users' personal data through terms and conditions, enabling access to photo albums, messages, and contact lists, among other sensitive details. Although some of this data is benign in isolation, when collected and collated on a scale, it can provide detailed patterns and insights on populations, public opinion, communities, and individual social and professional networks. Authoritarian states like the PRC use big data, including from the private sector, to carry out foreign interference activities. While government use of data in Canada is subject to ethical, legal, and privacy considerations, authoritarian states are not subject to these limitations. Through its 2017 National Intelligence Law, the PRC compels PRC citizens and entities to cooperate with PRC intelligence agencies upon request, which includes providing all information to the state and its intelligence apparatus. This policy supports and is reflective of the PRC's attempts to interfere in Canada and like-minded democracies. Canada and its allies must therefore exercise heightened caution when agreeing to share their data with platforms linked to the PRC. The ICA review process, which includes CSIS input, determined that allowing TikTok Canada to continue operating would cause injury to Canada's national security. Although the provisions of the ICA limit what I am able to disclose about specific cases, I would note that CSIS and the Government of Canada's assessment was consistent with the March 2024 policy statement on foreign investment review in the interactive digital media sector. Specifically, assessments consider factors such as reach and audience, the nature and extent of the investor's ties to a foreign government, and whether Canadian business is likely to be used as a vehicle by a foreign state to propagate disinformation or censor information in a manner that is consistent with Canadian rights and values. L'utilisation des médias sociaux.
Use of social media platforms also raises national security concerns when they act as a breeding ground for extremist ideologies and radicalized users. The increasing volume of violent rhetoric online it also raises concerns that consumers of this content are more likely to mobilize to violence. Youth, in particular, as they use social media platforms can be especially vulnerable to becoming radicalized online. CSIS continues to actively investigate, advise on, and disrupt national security threats. CSIS is also committed to building resilience through our modernized authorities under Bill C-70. This new authority recognizes that protecting Canada's national security is a shared endeavor that includes partnering with all levels of government, Canadian communities, academia, the private sector, and others. CSIS is committed to cooperating with these groups in the national interest, including through increased sharing of detailed threat information. I will conclude by noting that while CSIS cannot publicly comment on our specific operational activities or investigations, I welcome this opportunity to answer your questions. Thank you.
Okay, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for your opening remarks. We will start with the first round of questions. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. With respect to personal data being shared with the Beijing-based regime, you cited the 2017 national security law. Theoretically, it would seem to be true that there is a risk of data of Canadian users of TikTok to be shared with the PRC, but the position taken, the evidence we heard from TikTok when they came before this committee a few weeks ago was that that data had not been shared and that indeed a firewall had been set up to prevent the sharing of such data. Can you speak to that?
Well, I can speak to the first point, which is that we are concerned, there is concern about the risk of that data going to the PRC. As I think this committee has heard before, that data is not housed entirely in Canada, and there are questions about the applicability of Chinese law to Chinese companies, including the parent company of TikTok, which is ByteDance. So it is certainly foreseeable that data held by TikTok Canada could, as you suggested, end up in the hands of the People's Republic of China.
But at this point, it seems to me to be theoretical and nothing more than that.
Well, I can't speak publicly to any specific instance of data that's gotten there that we would have known through intelligence, but that is a certain risk that many of us are concerned with from a national security point of view.
And from the standpoint that it is a risk, how does shutting down the subsidiary of TikTok affect that in any way? It would seem to me that it is entirely unrelated, but to the degree that there is a risk, the risk continues, does it not?
I think it's a fair point. You're correct that the subsidiary TikTok Canada does not eliminate the use of the application here in Canada, nor the data that it holds. I would note it, going back to my opening remarks about the consistency of the decision with previous policy statements, and to say that the decision-making in that context is in an ICA process where certain events trigger decisions and reviews by the ICA, which is administered by ISED, and CSIS provides national security advice in the context of those triggered reviews.
Okay, thank you for that. And I will say, for you, Mr. Chair, that it is troubling to see the total lack of transparency on the part of this government with respect to this decision. Because the government, on one hand, is shutting down TikTok's subsidiary, but at the same time, Canadians are free to use the app. And I don't necessarily see why not, but there doesn't seem to be a consistency in terms of if the objective is concerned, for example, the use of personal information or personal data being shared with the Chinese Communist regime, the solution that the government has come up with doesn't seem to achieve that. at all, but I would just try to at least understand from the theoretical standpoint of personal data being shared with the PRC that TikTok did set up Project Texas, which ensures that U.S. data stays in the U.S. So I'm trying to understand when you say that there is a risk and that some of that data could be shared and would not entirely be housed or to remain in Canada. Well, what do you mean by that? Because it could be stored in the U.S. or what?
The concern in general is that the parent company of TikTok Canada is a Chinese entity and subject to PRC laws, which could compel them to act in ways of getting data or using the platform for other means that China sees fit, or the Communist Party of China sees fit. And so that risk continues to exist.
Now, is it the case that the Chinese company, ByteDance, operates the algorithm? It owns the algorithm?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And in terms of that operation, is it in China, in the PRC, that it is operated, that algorithm?
I'm not well placed to speak to
Okay.
the specific operations of TikTok. That would be a better question for them. But I imagine that there is a more distributed nature of that. I couldn't speak to that with any credibility.
Okay. So, because, I mean, it would certainly, at least from a theoretical standpoint, in terms of the risk, be an issue to the degree that the algorithm is operated by the Chinese company ByteDance. In order for the algorithm to work, data necessarily would have to be shared with ByteDance, and to the degree that the algorithm was being handled by ByteDance in that regard, then yes, pursuant to the 2017 national security laws, they could be compelled to share data with the Beijing-based regime. The problem that I see is that I don't see any evidence that that, in fact, has actually happened. It seems to be entirely
Mr. Cooper.
theoretical.
Yeah. So we're over time. Mr. Rogers, do you have a quick response to that, or it was more a comment than it was a question, I think. But,
Right. I think I've answered that, but
Okay.
I'm happy to.
okay. All right. So just for the benefit of committee, I did ask the clerk to reach out to TikTok to see if they would be available, because I thought they would be material to this discussion. And as you may or may not know, they did file a legal challenge against the federal government shutdown order. So not surprisingly, they declined to, or they weren't available to appear today. So, Mr. Housefather, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and Director Rogers, welcome to the committee. Nice to see you, Mr. Lynn. So I just want to start because Mr. Cooper's questions were very good, but I don't think they related to the ICA decision, right? The ICA decision had nothing to do with Canadian users' privacy. It had to do with national security issues other than that, because otherwise we would have banned the app completely if we were dealing with the privacy issues, correct?
Well, the question, I hope this answers your question. I mean, you're right that the ICA decision was specific to TikTok Canada because that's the transaction that triggered the review. So, yeah, yes.
So if I look at that, TikTok Canada and their legal challenge argued that there were procedurally unfair things that happened related to the national security review. I presume you would disagree with that contention?
Well, what I think it's actually important for me to say that CSIS forms one part of that review. Our context in that review is to provide national security advice and assessments, which goes into a broader context of decision-making. Very appropriately, the overall decision is not made by CSIS, it's made by others, and there are protections around that decision, which include cabinet confidence, national security confidentiality, and information that might be proprietary to the company. So there's a limit to what I can say, specifically also because there is a matter in front of the courts to which I can't comment on. I can say that CSIS participated in the decision. We did provide national security advice related to the decision. And, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the decision was consistent with the policy, and that's about what I can say.
I understand. So without asking you if CSIS gave, in its own advice, the decision to do what the end decision was, which was to require the company to close, can I ask you if CSIS in its review found significant security concerns posed by TikTok operations in Canada related to foreign influence?
Well, I can say that CSIS did provide national security advice, and that we did find that there were national security reasons to be concerned with TikTok Canada's establishment, and the ultimate decision was what it was.
And was one of the considerations what the American Congress decided to do, which is to say that within a certain amount of time they would have had to sell the company to a domestic or an American owner?
That's not an input that CSIS would have provided into this decision.
Okay, so you weren't looking at for anything other than the framework of the law to say yes or no, there are concerns that would require you then to take action.
That's correct. CSIS has a fairly prescribed role in that, which is to provide national security assessments to input into the decision-making process.
Okay, so then let me come back to the privacy questions that Mr. Cooper was asking. The former CSIS director, David Vigneault, had warned Canadians that they should steer clear of the TikTok app because it poses a data security risk. Would you concur with that advice? Is that also your advice?
I think Mr. Vigneault made a reasonable statement there. I think I have to stick with my role in CSIS, which is to not make decisions or recommendations on behalf of the government. I can certainly be clear that there are national security risks that we would assess inherent to TikTok as the platform, relating to what I described earlier about the potential for data, algorithms, and other things to be used by the PRC contrary to Canada's interests.
Well, while I have you here, is CSIS currently or has CSIS reviewed the algorithms of TikTok to determine if misinformation is being circulated on TikTok in different areas? For example, anti-Semitism. Is TikTok's algorithms furthering anti-Semitism in Canada by teaching a narrative that turns people or users against the state of Israel?
I will certainly say that rhetoric and narratives like the narratives that you describe are pervasive across many social media platforms, not just TikTok Canada. I don't have a specific point to raise here about TikTok Canada's algorithm specifically in relation to that. As I mentioned earlier, we're very concerned with the amount of content online that serves to radicalize particularly youth against any number of targets, including the Jewish community, the LGBT community, and many other targets. That's a trend that we're consistently worried about and increasingly worried about.
So would I be at least correct in assuming that this is ongoing activity that CSIS is looking at with respect to monitoring extremism coming through the TikTok platform and other similar platforms that are being used today in Canada?
Yes, TikTok and other platforms. In fact, we and our Five Eyes allies, along with our law enforcement allies, recently put out press release and guidance related to the radicalization of youth online very specifically. It's a challenge for us investigatively because often people are radicalized only online, and particularly youth. So that is a worrying trend.
Thank you. Do I have any time left, Mr. Chair? A minute 10?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you're still stuck with me. So let me come back. The algorithm, you mentioned TikTok Canada's algorithm. TikTok Canada's algorithm, in my understanding, would be no different than the algorithm being used by TikTok in the United States and in other countries, at least according to what I've heard from TikTok. So one of the issues related to what I understand has happened in TikTok is considerable misinformation has been floated for the 2016, 2020, and possibly the 2024 U.S. elections through the TikTok platform. Has CSIS looked at what we would need to do to protect ourselves in the 2025 Canadian election that we expect to have next year?
Well, CSIS has been very preoccupied with the concerns around foreign interference in elections, as I'm sure you're aware. That includes the possibility for threat actors to use social media platforms to advance disinformation or other narratives harmful to Canada's interests. I would say that that's not a platform-specific concern that we have. That's more around the intent and plans of foreign adversaries to use platforms however they might get their
because
messages.
I know my time is, but I'm talking specifically in terms of the government of Canada, the government of China, a foreign adversary. We have a special parliamentary committee dealing with China, using their algorithm on TikTok, which we understand could be controlled by the Chinese government or certainly Chinese sources, to try to help one side or another in a Canadian election.
You're over, and I need a very quick response.
Yeah, very succinct.
I'm going to give you a quick response, Mr.
My succinct response is that is one of the concerns that we worry about based on the PRC's law and the use of TikTok.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Housefather. Monsieur Villemure pour 6 minutes.
For 6 minutes, please go ahead. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being with us. We talked about in-depth investigation. What's an in-depth investigation?
Examination. It depends. In the context of an investigation, this might be an investigation into a particular threat actor. In the context of TikTok and the ICA, this would be a review of the activities of a particular company, its ties to foreign governments, any particular data that CSIS might have in its intelligence holdings that might inform the potential for a foreign actor to make use of a transaction contrary to Canada's interests.
OK. Est-ce qu'on
Could you give us a bit more detail about the national security risks that led to the shutting down of TikTok?
Comme j'ai
Yes, a little. As I said, I cannot talk about very specific detail.
In this case, as mentioned, there are concerns about the use of TikTok as a platform more generally. TikTok Canada is obviously affiliated with that platform, and those two things are not unrelated. I can't speak to the specific concerns that we would have with respect to TikTok Canada, given the issues I raised earlier.
Non, ben, ça, c'est très bien. La raison de ma question était simple.
Well, I asked the question for a simple reason, because in the past we saw the national security reason interpreted in a very wide manner. So can you talk to us about ByteDance? We know ByteDance owns TikTok, but do they have other activities? ByteDance's activities in general and the ownership structure?
And it's a Chinese company. That is the main preoccupation with us in the context of this review. It certainly operates TikTok, the application, which is a global application that hosts many, many millions of users. It is subject to the PRC national security regulations, and it has the potential to be used by China, contrary to Canada's interests. Désolé, je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu à votre...
I don't know if I answered your question. So who owns ByteDance? I do not know exactly. Because we often hear that there are French people on the board, but there is also the founding owner who is present in the ownership structure. The founder of ByteDance, or of TikTok rather, is still in the ownership structure. I do not know, and I don't want to give you incorrect information. Other than sharing information with the Communist Party of China, is there any other form of collaboration or cooperation between TikTok, ByteDance, and the government of China? What I can say is that, as Mr. Cooper said, we know that China's national security legislation applies to ByteDance and TikTok's operations.
Specific intelligence we would have that links anything concrete that we would know through intelligence channels.
Est-ce que dans le cadre de votre enquête au nom du...
In the review you did for the department, did you talk to the Privacy Commissioner?
Privacy Commissioner regularly. In the context of these reviews, typically the assessment is done by CSIS based on its intelligence knowledge and its threat assessments.
Est-ce que ce genre de revue-là, elle a lieu...
Do you often conduct these kinds of reviews? Do you have other examples? I think CSIS has done more than 1,000 last year. Okay. The final report, it's not available, is it? Our opinion to the government? No. It is not publicly available. It is...
Of our advice to government, it is often subject to other provisions like cabinet confidence in the decision-making process. And as I mentioned earlier, it will contain classified information and sometimes private information from the company.
Merci. Parce que le sujet que j'ai...
Thank you. Well, Mr. Cooper referred to this because we're being told, yes, TikTok needs to be shut down, but if you want, if it's your choice, if you want to keep using it, it's a bit paradoxical in my opinion. So the decision of the Government of Canada to ban TikTok from government devices, was it informed by your information?
Treasury Board Canada. From our point of view, data collection by TikTok, particularly against government devices, could cause particular national security concerns, and I think those are in some level different than the general use of TikTok. I should say that the decision-making process for many of these decisions, not just the Investment Canada Act, but the Government of Canada's decision to ban them on government devices, takes into account many different factors, not just national security. It can include economic factors, social factors, and others. When it comes to government decisions, we think about government data particularly and the particular national security concerns that would be inherent to that data.
Utilisez-vous TikTok?
No.
Monsieur Lind?
Do you use TikTok? Mr. Lind, do you use TikTok? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I don't use TikTok either. I don't have a reason to.
Mr. Green, 6 minutes. Do you use TikTok?
I did, yeah,
did, yeah.
quite regularly, and in fact stopped once the Canada-China investigations revealed targeting of MPs. Certainly, the list of social media interference or influence within democratic political election processes are well noted and well documented. Going back to 2016, you'll recall Cambridge Analytica. Lots of instances around Elon Musk's participation in the most recent election in the state. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Rogers, first of all, welcome to committee. I think this might be the first time I've had a chance to chat with you. In your opinion, how does TikTok differ materially from the way in which user information, data, algorithms, and profiles are used from other social media platforms?
Thank you for the question. To the extent that I can answer it, what I will say is that there are general concerns that Canadians or others may have around social media platforms that we're engaged in. Things like the spread of disinformation, the ability for those platforms to be used by people to radicalize Canadians or those who might seek to do harm to Canada. That's not something unique to TikTok. It's something that is generally done across social media platforms. The concerns that tend to be particular to TikTok have to do, again, with the regime that it can operate under because it is hosted and controlled, in theory, by China and the national security laws. We know that, what important factor of data is how it can be used. And in Canada and in other countries, there are differing privacy protections, legal recourse. In Canada, we have charter protections. There are many things that are inherent to our country that are not the same in China.
In your review, do you have any evidence or intelligence that you're able to publicly share that would indicate that TikTok had broken any Canadian laws?
Well, I can say that in our review, we were clear in the decision-making process about the national security concerns related to TikTok Canada as an element of our decision-making. I can't speak to the specifics on those, but I will also say that it doesn't require TikTok to have broken Canadian laws for us to have national security concerns. And that's
do you have? Sorry, my time's limited, so I have to take it back. Do you have concerns of other platforms? For instance, Truth Social, X, Discord, WhatsApp. We're talking about this and hopefully in a more comprehensive way than just targeting one platform. Would you care to comment on the threats for radicalization, as you've mentioned numerous times here at committee, from the other platforms?
Our concerns around the spread of information and radicalization are not specific to a particular platform, and nor have we, at least to my knowledge, I've only been the director for 6 weeks, but to my knowledge, we've not conducted such a similar review of either of any of those platforms at this stage, certainly not as part of the ICA process. As I've said, our concerns are to do more with the content and the potential for Canadians to be radicalized on those platforms.
Define radicalization. You use the term, but what does that mean legally?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And in our context, that typically means I use it as shorthand for radicalization to violence. So what we're concerned with is not There is a threshold. People are allowed to have a freedom of expression in Canada. People can say what they wish in social media, and they can consume the information that they wish. But radicalization for us is the process that someone may go through to take what are beliefs and translate that into the potential or the intention to commit violence and harm people here in Canada. My colleague Paul, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on radicalization.
Yeah, I would say that's essentially accurate. It's mobilizing towards providing support to violence or conducting a violent act.
What would be some examples of that in Canada recently?
Well, you've seen probably a number of arrests relating to individuals who have espoused radical ideologies and may have been planning attacks, in some cases youths. Examples of that include people who live in an echo chamber online and may have fewer connections outside to temper what they increase.
Those aren't examples. Those are generalities. Like, to be specific, the Quebec City massacre at the mosque, Ibrahim Jami Mosque in Hamilton firebombed, the London family who were run down. Would those be specific examples of radicalization?
I don't want to get that wrong. We have seen, and I won't use the name, I certainly know that some of the arrests that have been made this year have been linked to radicalization online as a primary factor. I don't want to give you misinformation and give you the wrong name associated with that, but I'm happy to report back if that's helpful.
If you're able, can you list in the case of TikTok the principal national security risks that you identified that led to the Government of Canada's decision to order it to wind up?
I can't speak to the specifics other than to say that we provided a national security assessment that highlighted some national security risks.
Are you okay? So what would be the risks of disclosing to this committee some of this information publicly?
Well, for one, I think there are decision-making privileges in cabinet confidence that we have to respect as part of the government's decision-making. Also, there is a matter before the courts that will have to go through a fair process there, and I need to be conscious that that process hasn't yet unfolded. And there may be classified information that could reveal sources or techniques or may have been shared with us by our allies who would not allow us to describe it publicly.
So, obviously, under the CSIS Act, you have a duty of candor to the courts. If in the process of the civil case you're asked these questions, you'll be forced to, in fact, disclose this. That's not correct?
Well, I can't offer specific legal advice. I know that there are processes to protect information in various legal proceedings in Canada, which which may be applicable in this case. I have not done a detailed review of how this case might unfold and what information might come to light.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. That concludes our first round, and I'm sure there will be lots of eyes on this court case for sure. Mr. Barrett, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
With respect to the decision that was taken under the Investment Canada Act, what alternatives or other options are available other than a complete shutdown of an entity here in Canada?
Some of those questions may be better directed to ISED Canada, who applies most of this act. And again, our input is limited to providing a national security assessment. That said, I do understand that there are other options available, including applying mitigation mechanisms, but I wouldn't want to speak to that on their behalf.
Okay. And is there a type of mitigation in a for example that you could offer?
None comes to mind right away. I apologize, that's not CSIS's area of expertise in the Act.
Okay, so if there's a national security risk so great that under the Investment Canada Act that the headquarters of this entity has been shut down or ordered shut down in Canada, but users, Canadians, are not restricted in their use of it, what are Canadians to make of that when the risk is so great that the government has ordered the shutdown of this entity? However, please feel free to continue to use the app. Well, what's the message that Canadians should take away from that?
Well, I can say from CSIS's perspective that we've been clear, as I have now, about the risks of the app itself.
Okay, so if I can you be clear? Should Canadians continue to use TikTok?
We have said, and I will say now, that there are national security concerns that we have around the use of TikTok in general, which includes the aggregate amount of data and the ability for the Chinese government to make use of that platform in ways contrary to the interests of Canada.
So you're saying Canadians should or should not use it?
I'm saying that the decision of a government to provide such a recommendation or decision to Canadians is best not made by CSIS. CSIS will provide a national security assessment, but it's very important that other factors be brought into those decisions. And the decision on TikTok Canada is very distinct from the decision on TikTok in general because there are very different factors in play.
Okay, so under the distinct question of whether or not individual Canadians, I'm not talking about a ban, I'm just talking about advice. You're the director of the leading organization in Canada's intelligence apparatus. You are at the foremost of this and at the forefront of this, and though new in role, appointed to it because of your qualifications with extensive experience in the intelligence community in Canada. Should Canadians continue to use TikTok? I'm not asking if the government should ban it for Canadians. I'm asking if, as the head of CSIS, if you believe it's wise for individual Canadians to use it.
I think that there's a very big distinction between an individual's choice to use something and the aggregate effect on Canadian national security. And so, for me, if I can give you a personal example, when I was young, I did not expect to be the director of CSIS. At the time, I may have looked at the information available to me and made a decision to continue to use TikTok because I wouldn't have thought that even if China had my information, I would have cared. I now care because I'm the director of CSIS. My perspective is that individuals need to consider their own risks, and that is an important factor in their making a determination. At this stage, I can't speak for government, but I can say there are risks that I hope Canadians consider when they personally decide whether to use TikTok or not.
So you talk about the aggregation of the data, the information, the pictures, the geolocation, the patterns, the habits of individual Canadians, that information being taken, potentially used by the communist dictatorship in Beijing, and aggregated. But with respect to the risks to individual users, I have just about a minute left. What are the risks to individual users, those younger Canadians, the young Mr. Rogers, the future director of CSIS? What are the risks to him in 50 seconds, sir?
Right. Well, one of those risks, and if the concern is that the Chinese government may access that data, they have seen, as we know, to engage in foreign interference in acts of transnational repression and other things that are contrary to the individual and collective interests of Canada. An individual now making use of TikTok would have to be aware that their data may be subject to that regime. And if you were someone who is vocally counter to the government of China or the Chinese Communist Party, you may have particular concerns immediately. If you are someone who's not in that situation, you may eventually have those concerns, and you'll have to take into account as an individual whether you want to take that risk.
And in my last few seconds, I hear concerns from businesses who operate, who sell their products here in Canada using TikToks, locally owned businesses in my community. What do I say to them? Should they also be concerned?
I think that the same advice applies. The data and the use of TikTok will be available through the regime that we've described, and they'll have to make those decisions.
Thank you.
Okay. Good discussion, Mr. Rogers. Just to let everybody know, I'm going to go to Mr. Baines for 5, M. Villemure pour 2 minutes et 30 secondes, et M. Green pour la même, et on va compléter cette...
So we'll do a round, but then we will end this meeting.
5 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our security intelligence representatives for joining us today. Actually, I'd like to take a moment just to thank you for your work and your proactive efforts on community engagement and the work with respect to Bill C-70, specifically on the Security of Information Act and strengthening something that hasn't been done in over 20 years and the work that you did there. So I want to thank you for your efforts there and the department's efforts there. I wanted to start with just stating prolonged operations by TikTok could allow foreign actors to exploit Canadian user data or spreading disinformation. This is an accurate statement in your mind, Director Rogers?
I think I missed the beginning of your question. I think you asked whether TikTok Canada could allow for the spread of TikTok could allow for the spread of disinformation. Yes, that's true, and it's true of other social media platforms also.
So, yes, specifically, I said the operations by TikTok could allow foreign actors to exploit Canadian user data and spread disinformation. That's accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, and CSIS, in terms of providing guidance on timelines for winding down the activities of TikTok to minimize potential risk to public safety and our democratic integrity, like what's been done?
Our role is to provide advice to the government in that regard. We've provided advice on a number of decision points, including the most recent one to wind up TikTok Canada. We also collect intelligence, obviously, and where we can collect intelligence that informs the government on how social media platforms are used by foreign adversaries or anyone who would seek to undermine the security of Canada, we would do that. And that classified information would factor into future government decisions.
Okay, and just going back to what my colleague, Mr. Barrett, raised, like having the physical presence of TikTok here on Canadian soil versus concerns about the app. Can you distinguish the difference between that?
Yes, as has been pointed out, the app itself can continue to run independent of the presence of TikTok Canada. I think
Is there a difference between the risk, like, having it here? Like, is it important for us not to even have it on our soil versus the app itself? I understand that they can continue to produce the information and take the data and use algorithms to scrape people's information on what they're doing. But that's the question.
Yeah, I think what I can say there is that the review of TikTok Canada individually did raise some national security concerns that were unique to that transaction, because in the context of the Investment Canada Act, we review that transaction itself. And that was factored into the government's decision at this time.
Okay, and you talked about our allied partners, Five Eyes. The government's aligned itself with our allies in recognizing the risks posed by TikTok. So how does CSIS assess Canada's response to these risks compared to our allies? Like, what are they doing? Are you all exchanging information to say, yes, this is working, this is not working?
It's a very good question. Each of our allies have different regimes for reviewing investment, for being able to, place controls on applications and other sorts of legislative frameworks. So it's not a one-to-one comparison. For CSIS, our primary activity is to make sure that we share and compare intelligence and assessments with our Five Eyes allies. This will include the activities of, for instance, China, and others as it relates to the use of social media platforms like TikTok, and I suppose where possible, where mitigation measures have proven effective by doing intelligence collection.
Are you able to measure, like TikTok is being used by yes, it's based out of China, it's a China company, but it's being used by billions of people. And are you able to identify certain maybe hostile nations using it more versus others?
I'll invite my colleague to jump in if he knows more than I do. We've certainly seen foreign actors use many social media platforms, including TikTok. We've been fairly public about concerns around disinformation, misinformation, and influence done by Russia, China, and others. Paul, did you want to?
Sure. I would say the concern with TikTok is specific to its association with the PRC. As has been mentioned here, TikTok collects a lot of personal data, has access to a lot of personal data on your device. And CSIS has been very public in warning about the risks of using TikTok, and it's very clear that there's a strategy on the part of the PRC to collect big data, personal data from all around the world, and collect it. Now, the PRC is also the primary threat actor in Canada conducting foreign interference. So when you have that size of vast collected personal data, and then on top of that you could put AI and machine learning, then you could use that to sort through that data and then use it back against people. And so you could use it for foreign interference, for targeting individuals, for cyber attacks, for intimidating, influencing, and compromising in the future. And so this is really the concern, is the vast access that TikTok allows to personal data and the fact that the PRC national security laws would compel it to share that data with them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Baines. And I really felt it important that Mr. Lind answer that question. So you had a lot more time there than normal, but it was an important response. Thank you, Mr. Lind. Monsieur Villemure, 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Dans 2 minutes 30, c'est pas très long. Hein?
2 minutes and 30 seconds isn't a lot of time. Are we seeing an uptick or an increase in the activities of the government of China in terms of interference, for instance, here in Canada? Is it going up? Is it increasing?
Certainly see continued foreign interference by the PRC here in Canada, and that's been something that has been maybe spectacularly public over the last little while, and something that concerns CSIS. We are concerned with it in this context, specifically in the potential use of social media to be able to provide narratives beneficial to the PRC that may be disinformation or contrary to Canadian interests.
Vous parliez de radicalisation un peu plus tôt.
You talked about radicalization. I've heard that the government of China seeks to create chaos through narratives. Do you see an uptick in some themes, such as religion or others? What are the themes or topics that are coming up?
Les thèmes, je pense, et peut-être Paul, tu veux dire quelque chose?
Maybe Paul can add some elements?
Really seeking to ensure pro-PRC narratives across the community, and that's something that we've seen fairly regularly. It's not necessarily about causing chaos, but it's promoting a narrative that serves its own interests, whether to make its interests, or to make it more appealing to Canadians to follow a Chinese perspective, which may be contrary to Canadians, and to try and influence particularly Chinese diaspora here in Canada. Paul, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, all I would say is that, you know, its primary focus is to protect the Communist Party of China. And what we're most concerned about from CSIS perspective is the foreign interference here in Canada in terms of them trying to achieve their objectives for their own foreign policy in Canada. So in terms of, I wouldn't have the detail handy for different themes of what they've been involved in, but our concern really is foreign interference here in Canada on behalf of the PRC.
Voyez-vous une différence sur l'utilisation de l'anglais, le chinois ou le...
Do you see any difference in terms of the use of English, French, or Chinese? Well, it's a good question. I don't know if the Chinese use English or French more here in Canada, but I know that they use any and all methods as long as they're effective.
In general, you know, there's a much more substantial English ecosystem in the United States, for example, which tends to have an effect on English-speaking Canadians or French-speaking Canadians who consume English media.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Villemure. Mr. Green, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. Perhaps the director can answer a question that TikTok itself couldn't answer, or at least wouldn't even entertain. From your perspective, as a member of Parliament, why should I not be on TikTok?
That's an excellent question. I think that the risks that I mentioned earlier in one of my responses apply especially to members of Parliament who may find themselves of interest to the Chinese government as a target of their influence. If your data is on TikTok, and if China avails itself of that data, they may seek to understand more about you, more about your personal networks, and more about the ecosystem that you work in to be able to target foreign interference, espionage, cyber attacks, or other things toward you. Obviously, as members of Parliament, you have particular access and influence in the government that most people don't enjoy, and I can imagine why you would be particularly interesting targets for government of China.
How is that different from the other platforms? I mean, presumably we're in a surveillance capitalism, setting aside the state capitalist country of China. What's to say the Chinese government or the Indian government or the Russian government or the Israeli government or the American government couldn't simply just buy that information directly from Meta, from X, or from any of the other actors that provide these types of platforms?
Another good question. I will certainly not say that TikTok is the only concern we have with respect to Chinese access to data and its influence activities. It is certainly one of the things that we're concerned about, particularly given its the potential for its national security law to apply directly to a company headquartered in China. One of the primary differences between TikTok and others, and between China and others, is that China has shown a history of engaging in foreign interference activities specific to Canada. It has a very sophisticated and capable cyber program for intelligence collection and espionage, and tends to be the #1 cyber actor prominent in Canada. So with respect to which government, I think China's distinguished itself in a number of ways.
Does your threat assessment change if the same type of activities are being observed by a quote-unquote ally?
I think CSIS's act and mandate is not country-specific. We look at anything that meets a national security threshold for us and is contrary to Canada's national security interests. Right now, that certainly includes the PRC and tends not to include our allies.
But wouldn't it be rational to think that we're more influenced by American media and American information than we are any other foreign actor?
American media and, as I was mentioning earlier, the targeting of disinformation by certain foreign actors toward an American ecosystem certainly has knock-on effects for Canadians who consume information in that ecosystem also.
Interesting. Wasn't exactly the question I asked, but an interesting response. Thank you very much. I know my time is up, and I'll just say, Mr. Chair, I'm still with more questions than we have answers around this, and I would really appreciate any information through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Rogers, even if it's at the direction of an in-camera briefing. I feel as an opposition member, Mr. Chair, and I'm not saying this as a point of privilege, but I'll put it out there, that we don't have all the information still to provide any kind of real analysis on this. So thank you very much, Mr.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. And on that point, I would certainly leave it to the discretion of yourself and other committee members just how you would want to handle this. The motion that was passed by the committee was to deal with this in the manner in which we are. There were specific requests for witnesses that were placed before us, and we're doing everything we can through the clerk to make sure that we have those witnesses in front of us. But I'll leave it to your discretion which way you want to go with this. Now, I believe that, do we have any other witnesses on this that Monsieur Vigneault, who we're still trying to get a hold of as the former director of CSIS as well. And then, of course, as I mentioned, I did invite TikTok. They weren't part of the motion, but as I said, I thought they were germane to the study, and they respectfully declined, given the circumstances, I assume, that they're now facing with the civil case. So, and the minister as well, I'm reminded, who has indicated to us that he will be available by the end of January or at the end of January. So that, I think, would be an interesting meeting as well. So we'll see what we can do to get everyone here, okay? So that being said, I don't have any other business, Ms. Shanahan. I'm going to go ahead.
Excellent. Just, are you planning a meeting for the 17th?
I'm leaving it open right now. I will give an indication to the committee. It's very difficult proposition for me to say just no at this point. I don't know what's going to come up, but you'll have an advance warning, and I understand there's an event that night that you need to be at. So, look, Mr. Lynn and Mr. Rogers, I do want to say on behalf of the committee, congratulations on your appointment. I can't imagine the work that you have in front of you. This committee has been engaged and involved in the issue of foreign interference, disinformation and misinformation, which I'm old enough to remember that used to be called lying. But you've certainly got a challenge ahead of you, and I want to thank you on behalf of the committee and on behalf of Canadians, and congratulate you on your appointment for being here today and dealing with the questions of the committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
it's
sir.
A pleasure to be here.
Okay, so that's it. Have a great weekend, everyone. Safe travels, and the meeting is adjourned.